Hi, I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, the presidential election is less than 4 months away. With presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden's reported polling lead, there's speculation President Trump could shake up his campaign leadership. Former Trump campaign manager, now Trump 2020 campaign senior advisor Corey Lewandowski weighs in on this theory and discusses how the reelection team plans to catch up in key battleground states. Also, Congress's Paycheck Protection Program facing scrutiny yet again, following revelations country clubs and ventures backed by billionaires benefited from coronavirus relief loans. Wall Street Journal associate editor and Fox News contributor John Bussey shares his thoughts on this controversy and the likelihood of another stimulus plan. Plus, commentary from author and syndicated columnist Cal Thomas. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
I'm Martha McCallum.
I'm Bill Hemmer.
I'm Shannon Bream, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, July 8th, 2020. I'm Dave Anthony. With Joe Biden leading in many polls, there's been speculation President Trump could shake up his campaign's leadership.
But I do think you'll see some changes at the campaign. I think you'll see some additions, because a campaign is about addition, not subtraction. It's about adding more professionals to the organization so that you have surround sound advocacy, so that you have more thoughts, not less.
I'm Lisa Brady. The COVID surge around the country could lead to another financial lifeline from Washington. Then again, it might not.
It could be a more fractious debate with the White House and Congress over what needs to be done first, deal with the virus or just spend more money.
And I'm Cal Thomas. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
As the coronavirus surges in many states with record new U.S. cases lately, President Trump has been pushing back, saying it's harmless to most people.
You look at deaths are way down from this horrible China virus.
And he wants schools to reopen this fall.
Everybody wants it. The moms want it. The dads want it. The kids want it. It's time to do it.
He's focused a lot on the economic recovery from the shutdowns that put us in a recession. The president has boasted of a better third quarter, which we're in now, and an even better fourth quarter, which we will be in on Election Day in November. But many polls have him trailing Joe Biden, his Democratic challenger.
It's so reminiscent to 2016, where at this point in the election cycle, most public polls showed that Hillary Clinton had a 9-point advantage over Donald Trump in national polling.
Corey Lewandowski was the Trump campaign manager for part of 2016, now back as a senior advisor in 2020.
In my opinion, and I know something about this stuff, national polling doesn't matter. What does matter are the key battleground states, states like Ohio and Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, Florida. In a number of those places, Donald Trump is in as good of a position, if not a better position, at this point in the campaign than he was in 2016. Now, I know that doesn't fit the narrative, but if you go ask any reasonable Democrat if they think that Joe Biden has a chance to win in the state of Ohio, there is no reasonable person who's going to say yes. The same is also true for Iowa. We've taken those states basically off the electoral map, which allows us to focus on the additional battleground states. Very important for our strategy for 2020.
However, there have been a lot of stories that his electoral map is shrinking. You mentioned some of the states that you think are good for the president. Arizona is a state that's said to be possibly leaning toward Joe Biden. North Carolina, Georgia's considered to be in play now. Polls have shown Joe Biden in the lead in Florida. Some people think Texas is in play, and that Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, all states the president won in 2016, are in jeopardy. Do you agree with that analysis that has been out there lately?
Well, I don't, and let me just tell you why. You know, I keep hearing this now for 25 years that the Democrats have taken back Texas. The last time a Democrat won in the state of Texas, statewide, now not in the congressional district, but statewide, was before George W. Bush was elected governor. Look, North Carolina, not only did Mitt Romney carry that state when he ran against Barack Obama, Donald Trump won that state. It is a state that is a huge military presence with Fort Bragg there, Camp Lejeune. It's a place where It has a big military population, and this president has done enormous things for our men and women who wear the uniform every day and those that have retired. So we saw success in North Carolina. As it relates to Arizona, absolute battleground state. We've got a competitive U.S. Senate race there, but we've got a great team on the ground there, and we're going to win. And the map also should indicate that states like Minnesota all of a sudden have come into play. My home state of New Hampshire, where Donald Trump did not carry that state by a tally of 2,700 votes, is now in play again for Donald Trump, and he'll be in New Hampshire on Saturday night. So we have opportunities in 2020, which we didn't have in 2016.
All right, let's get to the rally in New Hampshire. It'll be in Portsmouth. It'll be outside. There's been more urging and recommending now by the Trump campaign for people who go to wear masks.
I think it's an issue of personal responsibility. This is an outdoor rally in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. It's going to take place at 8 o'clock at night. It's going to be on an airport facility, which means airplane hangar. Some people will be in. Some people will be out actually on the runway or the tarmac, as it's commonly referred to there in the area. So there's plenty of room for social distancing if people want to do that. If people want the precaution of wearing a mask, by all means, they should do that. People need to have personal responsibility here, and that includes good sanitation, which is good hand washing, taking care of yourself. If you have any symptoms, we don't want you arriving. If you are in a demographic where you have the possibility of becoming ill or you are more susceptible to it, we don't want you interacting with other people. And unlike the Tulsa rally, you're not going to see people in a confined location in an indoor arena, so that's also going to help us.
The virus has been surging in some of these a lot of states, not New Hampshire, but a lot of other states like Florida, where the president's nomination speech will be, a lot of the convention public events will be in Jacksonville next month. There's some concern about that indoor space. Are you worried that that might not happen the way Republicans had hoped it would happen in Jacksonville?
Well, I think the world of coronavirus has changed everyone's outlook on what things used to be and where they are today. I think we are in a position where people are much more cognizant of who they're interacting with, the handshaking, the hugging, all of those things, the close proximity to other people. Look, I believe that every precaution should be taken and will be necessary. The Republican National Committee is working very diligently to make sure that before people even arrive at the arena, so either at their hotels or on transportation in, everyone will be tested for COVID-19. But I think we're going to have an amazing convention when the president goes and accepts his nomination from our party to be reelected as once again the 45th president of the United States.
Going back to 2016, in June of that year, the Trump campaign made a change, and Corey Lewandowski was out as manager. Chairman Paul Manafort took over, and then in August, Kellyanne Conway, now counselor to the president, became campaign manager. In 2020, Brad Parscale has that job. There have been reports at times the president or others close to him have been unhappy with Parscale, but he is still the manager even after some personnel changes.
I traveled with the president to South Dakota to attend that rally on the 3rd of July. We didn't talk about Brad at all, but I do think you'll see some changes at the campaign. I think you'll see some additions because a campaign is about addition, not subtraction. It's about adding more professionals to the organization so that you have surround sound advocacy, so that you have more thoughts, not less. And I think what you'll continue to see, and you've started to see this already at the campaign, is the addition of more people either in senior advisor roles or people who are spending time with the president. And so I think that's very, very important. I don't foresee Brad going anywhere on the campaign, but I do think that Brad recognizes the fact that more voices coming in and giving more candid, open and honest discussion about ways that the campaign should be moving forward is very important. And he has been very, very open to that. Me as a senior advisor, I have unlimited access to Brad. I participate in a series of very senior calls where we discuss strategy and ideas and objectives. And so, look, he's very open to that, and I think you'll see more of that as the campaign continues here over the next 4 months.
Joe Biden has long given President Trump an F for his coronavirus response, and the presumed Democratic presidential nominee calls him divisive amid all the racial turmoil in the past few weeks. Biden says if he's elected, he will transform the country.
We have a chance now to give the marginalized, the demonized, the isolated, the oppressed a full share of the American dream.
That was in the former vice president's 4th of July message.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. We've never lived up to it. Jefferson himself didn't. He held slaves. Women were excluded. But once proposed, it was an idea that couldn't be constrained.
Now, a statue of Thomas Jefferson is among those torn down the past few weeks. President Trump has called those protesters anarchists, and his 4th of July weekend message was different.
We will never allow an angry mob to tear down our statues, erase our history, indoctrinate our children, or trample on our freedoms.
He keeps calling for law and order.
When it comes to the right to protest, nobody's opposed to that. There is a proper way to do that. There are traditionally permits that are issued for these things, and large gatherings have happened in our country since the Boston Tea Party. But this notion that people can just go and take the protest into their own hands and destroy federal pieces of property is not one that our country supports. And, the people who are most insulted by this, by and large, the women, the suburban women who want the safety and security for their family. And that's who the president is standing up for. The people who believe that it is their right to be able to walk down the street and not have to live in fear, to know that they have a business that will not be destroyed because someone is protesting over something. And this notion that we're tearing down statues now of people like Abraham Lincoln, someone who obviously freed the slaves. I think what we have is a small group of people who don't understand their history, who are doing this just to destroy property, and the president is going to stand with the law and order people of this country 100% of the time.
Where do you think Joe Biden is most vulnerable as we get into the fall? We have the debates, of course. What do you think the president is going to go after most?
Well, look, I think it's very clear that in Joe Biden's 44 years in elective office in Washington, D.C., he doesn't have a signature piece of legislation that he can talk about, because the one piece of legislation that he did champion, which was the criminal justice package, disproportionately impacted African-American men by putting them in jail for a longer period of time than anybody else. And Joe doesn't want to talk about that. Joe doesn't want to talk about the fact that he gave the eulogy at Robert Byrd's funeral, a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Joe doesn't want to talk about the fact that his mentor, when he went into the U.S. Senate in 1973, was Senator Eastland of Mississippi, who was known as the voice of the white South. Joe doesn't want to talk about his racist past, but that's okay. That's okay, because the American people have seen what Donald Trump has been able to do for the African-American community and minority communities, whether it's empowerment zones, whether it is the lowest unemployment rate ever recorded in the African-American community or Hispanic community, whether it is criminal justice reform. Donald Trump is completely agnostic to the color of a person's skin, and Joe Biden can't say the same, and his legislative record is one that clearly indicates he has not supported the African-American community in his 44 years in public service, and that needs to be reminded to some people.
There are a lot of people that call the president, and even some elected officials call the president a racist or a white supremacist.
It's such an easy thing to do, right? It's so easy to throw terms around, to say things like you're a racist or you're a misogynist or you're xenophobic, but his record is very different. Barack Obama had the opportunity in 8 years to do all of the things that President Trump has been able to do in the first 3 years, whether that's criminal justice reform, whether it's the empowerment zones, whether it is commuting a number of individuals or pardoning individuals who are wrongfully imprisoned for what was at the time very minor crimes. I think of Alice Johnson, who was serving a life sentence for drug trafficking, and Donald Trump freed her, not Barack Obama.
Do you think Democrats are overconfident?
Well, aren't they always? It's always amazing. I do think that the truth is they've got a good Senate map this cycle. It's the converse of what we had 2 years ago. So they may have some opportunities to pick up some seats in the United States Senate, but they always overplay their hand. But they don't represent the values of the American people, which is law and order, smaller government, lower taxes, less regulation, and being proud to be Americans. And it's sad to say that the Democratic Party no longer holds those ideals to be important, but it is something that is truthful.
Corey Lewandowski, good to talk to you again. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
This is Cal Thomas with your Fox News commentary. Coming up.
Many businesses, especially small businesses, were hoping for a summer of recovery. But coronavirus doesn't care. Texas topping 10,000 cases in a single day. California also hitting a new daily record. And hospitals in over 24 Florida counties reaching full capacity in intensive care units. President Trump says what's not being reported is a decline in the U.S. mortality rate, and that his response has saved millions of lives, as the administration focuses on reopenings, not reclosings.
There is a safe way to reopen the economy, and we're going to do that carefully.
That was Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin after Thursday's employment report for June, showing a second straight month of job gains. And he often praises the popular Paycheck Protection Program, intended for small businesses, though some not so small operations ended up getting loans, some of them returning the money later. Even bands tapping into the flow because of canceled or postponed tours. Big names like the Eagles and Pearl Jam. The program, initially approved just a few weeks after shutdowns began in March, won overwhelming support in Congress.
The presumption was, well, this shutdown's going to be a few weeks, maybe a couple of months.
John Bussey is an associate editor of the Wall Street Journal and a Fox News contributor.
And if we keep as many small businesses, so it was aimed at small businesses, thriving and able to keep people on their payroll and able to pay their rent and pay, for food, that would be a way also of sustaining the economy. But what happens with these kinds of programs, particularly when the restrictions on them are kind of unclear, is that you have everybody belly up to the trough. And in this case, a lot of big companies, big law firms, big hedge funds, big real estate companies, the personal businesses of some Congress people, everybody kind of rushed the door. They weren't sure how long the crisis was going to last. And there was, essentially free cash at hand. This was money that if you met certain minimal criteria, you kept people on the payroll, eventually it would become a grant. So people went for it. And as a result, a disproportionate amount of the money ended up going to larger entities, not necessarily small business, but bigger companies.
There's also been people with ties to political leaders who are among the loan recipients, a company that Jared Kushner used to own, a company that House Speaker Pelosi's husband invested in. How does that make the small business owner who doesn't have those connections feel?
Trampled, I would imagine. The lawyer and the law firm, of that helped represent President Trump during the Mueller investigation and did work for him before he became president. This was one of the entities that got a PPP loan, as well as a lot of other law firms. Sometimes these are partners who are earning north of $1 million apiece. That's not small business in the traditional sense of what the average American would think of as small business. The local diner, the local nail salon, the barber, the dry cleaner, the small grocery store, in your neighborhood. So a lot of the money ended up sort of going to bigger entities. You could argue that had a positive impact because it did help people stay employed. But the larger entities were meant to have other means of getting cash. This program was for those companies who didn't have ready access to a revolving line of credit at a bank or to shareholders or to other entities that could kick in cash to keep them going. This was meant to be a lifeline to those small businesses.
That recent surge that we're having around the country, too, raises more questions, because what happens now that some businesses are having to close a second time, for instance, in Florida, where they're telling bars to shut back down again? If those workers are furloughed a second time, how does that affect the existing loan, including, the rules for having the loan be forgiven?
Look, the unfortunate mismanagement of the health crisis, the fact that we have no national plan. We don't have national testing and contact tracing and isolation programs. It's all left up to the state in this kind of cacophony of different programs. Some are opening their schools, some are not. Some are providing data, some are not. And you have this surge of cases. Leads you to the conclusion that, one, there will have to be additional stimulus. Congress has already been active on that front. But that this is going to damage the very businesses that the PPP program was meant to save. Those small businesses, if they have to close again, and some are already having to close, are going to get crushed by this. They're going to have to not just furlough but lay off people, and the funds that are forthcoming the next time may simply not be enough to keep them going.
The House passed another relief bill in May, the HEROES Act. But unlike the previous CARES Act, it passed mainly along party lines, and the $3 trillion effort stalled in the Senate, where Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has been leading a Republican wait-and-see approach to further stimulus efforts. Even he's now signaling it may be time.
We may well do that, and if we do it, we'll do it in July. And I can tell you for sure that if we do another bill, it will have liability protections in it.
But that's one of several ideas that does not appear to have much bipartisan support.
After the May unemployment report proved fairly positive, and after there was this uptick in economic activity in the United States as cases were trending down in particularly hard-hit states like New Jersey and New York, there was a bit of optimism on the Republican side and in the White House, and kind of wondering, geez, do we need to really spend as much as the Congress is asking us to spend on another round? Well, that was before what's happened in Texas and in Florida and Arizona and Oklahoma and in California, where there's been a resurgence of the coronavirus. It never went away. Now the debate is going to be over, okay, well, how much do we need to spend to keep these companies afloat? And will that actually be enough if there's no end in sight, if we haven't somehow found a way to vanquish or at a minimum tame the virus? Are we going to be constantly having to re-up trillions and trillions more to keep the economy stimulated? I think that the conclusion is going to come around to you've got to do a better job of managing containment of the virus before you can even begin to think of any end to stimulating the economy.
I've definitely heard Democrats make the argument that there hasn't been enough, national leadership on this. But on the other hand, do things like the problems with the Paycheck Protection Program and even the problems at the state level with the unemployment insurance system and big delays for some people in getting those checks in the first place, do those kind of problems, run counter to the traditional Democratic push for more and bigger government running things, because it doesn't always work out so well?
That's right. Whenever you push this much money out the door as quickly as it was pushed, you're going to have lots of problems, and we're seeing that right now. The argument that will be made is, yes, that's true, but it was a fire extinguisher on a blazing fire, and it needed to happen fast. It needed to happen in an expansive way. That doesn't really make you feel too satisfied as a taxpayer, though, when you're seeing large multi-million-dollar entities get this money, and even, Lisa, groups that are against big business. The Ayn Rand Institute, whose founder was not fond of big government, rather, of government, sort of the dead hand of government being involved with business, seek out these funds. And so there's a lot of irony in this, and there's a lot of waste, and there's a lot of misdirection of the money. All that said, I think the argument against doing nothing is that you would have had a much worse circumstance for individuals who did need to pay their rent, and companies who have been able to, at a minimum, keep the lights on and sustain themselves through the last 4 months. But the coming months are a whole different story. It's going to be a more fractious debate with the White House and Congress over what needs to be done first deal with the virus or just spend more money.
In the midst of all of this, President Trump is following through on his threat to withdraw from the World Health Organization, which he's criticized, along with China, for the response to the initial coronavirus outbreak in Wuhan. Are you seeing any evidence that this is something the American public is paying attention to at all, or is, worry about the virus really just swallowing everything else?
Well, I think it's probably the latter. People are most interested in their day-to-day life and whether or not their kids are going to be able to go back to school in the fall, whether it's safe for them, whether they've got a job, whether it's safe to go back to that job, get on the subway, get to work, what's going to be happening at work. If I'm X, age, am I going to be exposing myself to COVID, at work? And the WHO way off in Geneva is kind of not on their radar screen. The president's decision to withdraw the United States is a result of his feeling that the WHO misinformed the United States about the severity of the outbreak in China. He blames China for the same, not informing the United States. He blames the WHO. He blames individual state governors, particularly in Democratic states, for not doing enough about the coronavirus. There's a lot of blaming done by the president, but the truth of the matter is that he was getting plenty of intelligence separate from the WHO through the National Security Council and other health authorities, way back at the beginning of the year. And the president delayed, talked the virus down, said that it was going away, said it would go away, when the spring, got warm. I mean, you've heard all this. So to blame the WHO, I think, is kind of a non-starter. It serves a purpose. It's not perfect, but it serves a purpose, and it's in the health interest and in the self-interest of the United States citizen to be a part of that international organization.
We've essentially given them a 1-year notice of withdrawal, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. John Bussey, Fox News contributor and associate editor of the Wall Street Journal. Thanks very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Did you hear the news? Now you can. With instant updates from Fox News for Amazon Alexa. Just say,
Alexa, play news from Fox.
In Fox News.
It's the latest when you need it, on demand, from Fox News and Amazon Alexa. Rate and review the Fox News Rundown on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Cal Thomas.
What's on your mind?
What did we think would happen once boundaries were destroyed? The chaos plaguing the country today was inevitable after truth, standards, and self-control were all but ignored by many in our society. That great philosopher, the late Marilyn Monroe, was ahead of her time when she said, quote, "When I was 5, I think, that's when I started wanting to be an actress. I loved to play. I didn't like the world around me because it was kind of grim, but I loved to play house. It was like you could make your own boundaries," unquote. Making one's own boundaries has led us to this moment. Truth has become subjective. The U.S. Constitution, some judges claim, is now open to interpretation, as we witnessed when a Supreme Court majority, 6-3, again legislated from the bench when they redefined sex in the 1964 Civil Rights Act as meaning not simply gender, as in male and female, but sexual identity, as in gay and transgender. After the court's 2015 ruling in favor of same-sex marriage, it was 5-4, polygamous groups said they'd be next to demand equal treatment. What's to stop them? What if morals and laws evolve and conformity to the spirit of the age and opinion polls is what matters most? Statues and paintings that offend some but not others are being torn down or defaced. Perhaps the frieze over the U.S. Supreme Court building should also be removed. It shows many lawgivers looking to Moses, who is at the center holding the Ten Commandments. Those are no longer considered relevant in today's America, so maybe they should be chiseled away. Church-state separation, you know. In God we trust is embedded on walls in the House and Senate and on our money. Clearly, that's no longer objectively true, so perhaps we should remove that saying. Hearings could be held so people who claim we continue to trust in God can present evidence we still do. Valedictorians, sports trophies, and in some cases grades have been abandoned because some who were not as talented or didn't work as hard to achieve honor might feel bad. So we dumb down and make everyone equal, supporting mediocrity as the highest objective. This is what socialism does. Those who deny any standard and then appeal to the rest of us based on a standard of their own making can't have it both ways, though they're trying. The late evangelist and scholar Ravi Zacharias observed, quote, "Pleasure without God, without the sacred boundaries, will actually leave you emptier than before. And this is biblical truth. This is experiential truth. The loneliest people in the world are amongst the wealthiest and most famous who found no boundaries within which to live. That is a fact I've seen again and again," unquote. As the psalmist wrote long ago, when the foundations are being destroyed, what can the righteous do? I'm Cal Thomas.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. It's the Perino and Steyerwalt I'll Tell You What podcast. Dana Perino of The Five and Fox News political editor Chris Steyerwalt dissect the ins and outs of national politics. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust, and click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.